So the basic thesis of my talk, I'm going to talk a bit about the challenges, like how we started on the development of our car, the challenges we faced and why we actually really failed last year, and where we're going forwards. So this is our concept of our vehicle as we started last year. We were really looking for a very practical on-the-road design that we wanted to be as much like a standard on-the-road car as possible. Our intention was, and still is, to register the vehicle and be able to drive it around Adelaide, and that's reflected in our design process. This is what the finished car looked like, and while we were very proud of it, it definitely has a problematic process getting to this stage. The basic car stats, well, we were working with we were aiming for about a 500 kilo limit. It ended up being about 600 unloaded, and when we had both battery packs in, it went well over 700 kilos, which has led to other problems following on. We were running 2 Moran 5-watt motors, which would have given us an expected top speed of around 80 k's, and 218 SunPower E-Series solar cells. We've got that size for the batteries there was for 1 battery pack. We got to the end of the process and basically we're expecting to put 2 battery packs in it with double that energy storage, and then we halved it just to be able to make the weights that we needed. So this is our the chassis design that we started with. We went with a space frame, both for lightness and strength, and many of the scrutineers described our design as a tank. Some scrutineers said that if they were going to crash in a solar car, they wanted to crash in ours. However, as you look at this, it starts to point out some of the problems we faced, which was partly from a fragmented design process. If you look at Stuart Wildy sitting up there, sitting in about the position that the seats were mounted in, you can see his eyes are actually very low to that bar. And then when the aerodynamic design went in, which was to shield windscreen wipers and so on, well, the Australian design rules are that you must be able to see the road within at least 11 metres in the front of your vehicle. I think most of us are unhappy if it's more than 2. When I stepped into the team and started assessing where the designs were going, it was more like 30, 80.
Oh, wow.
Not quite able to perceive the horizon. And the part of the reason for this is that our design process was, like I said, fragmented. A student would take on a project, run a design across 1 semester, add that to the wiki, and then we'd have to scrabble around to get some other people that would be involved in the team. This was around the time that I was not involved in the team at all due to my own study requirements. And so essentially, eventually, we've got somebody who spent their academic career designing doors, someone who did the aerodynamics, someone who's done a frame. Each of those have been forced to redesign unpleasantly a number of times, and then some arsehole, as me says, we also need to see. I would also like to note that this is the loading block we had to work in. That was not a flat floor surface, and it wasn't a place we could constantly work on. So we would have to take our work, shuffle it in there regularly, and then shuffle it out again out of people's way in between builds. So we developed jigs that we could build on and take apart easily. But they, like for here, this was us building on the front and rear spaces that would mount the shell and support the electronics components, the energy storage. But that MDF construction did have a bit of variability to it. And when we got to doing our suspension, mistakes were made. As we got forward, we got to this is the rolling chassis as it got toward developing. You can see we went with a wishbone structure here. This did end up resulting where we would have a fair amount of bump steer, partially due to some inaccuracy because of the jigs we used to position things were a little susceptible to, if you put some pressure on one side trying to make everything steady, things could move a little. It was also the case that by this stage we were getting quite late in our process and things were getting a bit rushed. In particular, that top arm there was actually the wrong part. So some of our suspension parts were 10, 15 mil out of where they were specified to be. This kept going forward. From there, by the time we got up to putting on the shell and chassis, this really came down to more craftsmanship. So people really piled in, and we got down to duct taping, putting tabs on the back, welding parts in as we suited. Because this became less of a design process, we got a bit of extra weight, but I was really proud of the way we all got it in there and got it done. But yeah, that just highlights what I see as some of the problems we faced, particularly with the limited access and a lot of the restrictions having to do things with probably some suboptimal procedures because of what students were allowed to touch. Getting up there. So we have learned a lot about how we would attach things, how we would build things. You'll notice the cut edges, which essentially we didn't really design our connections. And so moving forward, our new shell, which Cameron will be talking to you later, is going to be taking a lot of those lessons, though mostly we're more concerned about the aerodynamics at this point. So moving on, we got up to Darwin. As I said, we were having a real challenge to get this stuff together, so we got up to Darwin to finish building the car. We were one of the only teams that brought a welder for a reason, and so that was important because essentially we met spec for most of the things on our car. There are a lot of things we hadn't tested or checked, but for example, we had tie-down points on the bottom of our car that were correct and as they should be, but the ramp going into the scrutineering hall wasn't, which means there was a very loud thud. We managed to manhandle the car in on the first day of scrutiny, and then they said, "Can you build something else on the bottom of the car tonight, Kurt?" So my days up in Darwin were 8 a.m. to 4 a.m. every day of the week until we got all the issues that were mechanical solved. That went on for a bit. So it was a really, really great team environment, a big adventure, and like you can see Ben and David up there working through electronics. Like I said, there was a lot of stuff. We hadn't really tested a lot of our control systems once we got up there. And the car wasn't finished, but it was very close. So we got it running, we got it done, and one of our major challenges was 18 hours standing in scrutineering. It was a very long and intensive process with a lot that wasn't clear to us before we got up there. So there was a lot of learning about how to engage with the solar car organisation in that case. But eventually I got past the mechanical, and at that point we pretty much dumped everything on Dave here to complete. And there wasn't a lot we could do except get out of his way. So I ended up starting to help other teams. This is the Korean Transport Uni, who had their steering columns were all carbon fibre and all spiral shattered during transport. So I made friends. This was the Durham University trailer, which basically collapsed on the first day. We were available to help for reasons we're not really happy about, but help we did. This is the suspension wishbones of the Polish team who, doing figure 8 testing, got rather excited and having gotten a successful pass, then ran over a lot of cones. Bending their suspension and then asking for some reinforcement. However, the biggest drama was the Chile team. Their car that was mounted on a 2-ton rated dual axle trailer for the trip over from Sydney, and on the way over, one of those axles on the higher trailer actually fell off and mounted the other axle. It started being mounted by the other axle, and that whole thing started going up and down a lot, shattering their suspension mounts. They also did not receive their crate of all their technicals that they'd have shipped over, all their tools, their spare parts, anything. So they arrived with a car and nothing but. So once I had some spare time, I basically went around finding bits of scrap metal and working on the floor with a gasless MIG, built them suspension mounts that, I've got to say, it's the messiest hack job I've ever done, but it was within 0.5 degree of alignment and 0.03 of the dimensions of their original parts in all their mounting points. I did not clean off all the splatter, and I do not apologise for that either. The other thing on the Chile team was on the last day of scrutineering, they got informed that their roll cage was not compliant. So I made them a new one. We were rather happy about that. They actually let me sign their car, which was a big deal, and I think I've made some long-term friends because I'm still in contact with those guys. But yeah, so we got to the last day of scrutineering. I would point out that our car actually set unofficial Bridgestone World Solar challenges. We had the fastest car evacuation with 3 people out of a car in under 4 seconds. And we set the fastest time around the figure 8 test that anyone had ever done. However, as we got to the last day of scrutineering, in fact, our motor controllers burned out. Our CAN bus system began to throw an increasing number of errors, and we basically had a cascade of failures. We went from being able to make what most teams said were rather impressed with our clip, to not being able to make 5Ks an hour. And this was at 4 a.m, just before the dynamic. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah. Either way, the point was, we actually came to the conclusion that if we had had another 12 hours, particularly with the skills of David here, and Cambridge team also came to help us a lot, we would have at least gotten very close. But the timing of the failure, well, that's why the pre-process is really important, why ad hocs are a big problem. Moving forward, as you can see, we did get rather emotionally involved last year. So our car was largely designed on a very large energy storage component, and basically being able to, I think they said last year we had 10% of the energy storage for the entire competition in our one car. However, so we were essentially aiming to laugh at efficiency a little bit. The new challenges mean we need to get from Tennant Creek to Cooper Pedy on a single charge, and we can't generate a charge, we can't plug in along the way. So we've got to make some fairly significant changes. So where we're going, we've rejigged our energy storage, so we're going back to the double battery pack size, but in one pack in the middle of the car. We're correcting a lot of our suspension changes. That is an obsolete detail because we had some advanced mechanical design project students designing up a replacement suspension, but that has been backburnered. We are rebuilding our wishbone storage a better way, going to 2 people, and drivetrain changes, which I'll let Dave tell you more of the details why, and a new aerodynamic shell. Skipping that one. On to you.
Yeah. Hi everyone, I'm Cameron. After every Bridgestone World Solar Challenge, they like to change up the rules and regulations a little bit. So to our delight, last year they released one that was you had to get from Tennant Creek to Cooper Pedy, which is 1,200 kilometres, on a single charge. So that made us sort of think about our current design and aerodynamics being, trying to increase the efficiency, and aerodynamics being probably account for 75% of the drag. We decided that we should change the shape of the car, or at least have a look at it. This is what I've been working on as my honours project. So up the top there you can see our original profile of the car that we took up to Darwin, and that had a drag coefficient of about 0.22. And so we've been looking at reducing the backlight angle of the car to make it more of a fastback shape for aerodynamics, and just seeing how that increases the efficiency as well. So I've been looking at different shapes, and this is one of them. This is a 20-degree backlight slope there, and from the CFD that I've run, it seems like it has a 0.186 thereabouts drag coefficient. So we are seeing a reduction there, and also as well as increasing it for aerodynamics as well. having it on an angle obviously will be better for the capture of sunlight as well.
At least in a south direction.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's just one direction. Yeah, and also it seems to have increased the solar array area as well by about 1 square meter. So that's looking promising as well. So yeah, as I said, I've been going through some body modifications. You can see here there's the front and the back shape. I flattened some of the panels on. You can see on our original cars a lot of curves. There was a lot of compound curves. So obviously, when we tried to put the solar cells on, which were encapsulated in a flat piece, they only bend in one direction. So it wasn't great. So we've decided we're going to try and flatten the panels that the solar cells are going to sit on to just make it more flat and more smooth.
May I break in for a second? One small point that I forgot to mention about our solar encapsulation is that we put our solar cells encapsulated in a very clear, forgot the word for fiberglass for a second, surface that was very tough and relatively flexible, but it's Praxis technology that we were using. But it was unlike anything anybody else had up there. So where the rule on a solar car race is nobody touch the solar cells, in fact, don't even get them wet, we were kind of rinsing ourselves under a tap. And at one point, there's some reject. Somebody saw us actually standing on what was actually a reject set of solar cells, but the reactions were rather amusing to see.
Yeah, so the technology we use to encapsulate them is pretty amazing. You can bend them and everything. It increases the durability amazingly. So yeah, we hope to put them on the flattened panels. And obviously, due to money constraints, there's not too much of the body we can change because it costs so much to create the molds and new fiberglass panels. So I'm trying to limit the amount that I'm going to change. So that's why we've gone for a flat back panel and flattening the bonnet area as well. Yeah, I think I've covered that. Yeah, so this is just some shots of the computer fluid dynamics that I'm doing, computational fluid dynamics. So yeah, this is just a ISO surface of the wake region, or some of the flow over the body. And yeah, you can see it's got a reduced recirculation area behind the car, and there's a strong creation of a strong vortex, which is common to a fast back shape. So yeah, I'm still sort of in the middle of validating all of that and just modifying it slightly to increase it. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. And yeah, I think, is it David next? Yeah, I'll pass on to David.
Okay, hi everyone. My name is David. I hope you can hear me okay. I'll stand next to the mic. There we go. Cheers. So it was a hell of a 3 weeks in Darwin that we spent building a solar car. And unfortunately, it culminated in this little effort of getting it over the starting line. These guys are actually not there for show. They're pushing the car, and Stuart, our team director, is in there driving it. So that was a little disappointing, considering that we all worked so hard. But I think that we learned a lot, and we got pretty close to, well, we got a pretty good head start on next year, we hope, on this year. So yeah, this is just a quick overview of the more electrical parts of the car, I suppose. That was sort of my job. And so we had one sort of particular problem that we identified with the original motors that we were running, and with the weight of the original car. The car was very heavy. It had very low torque. Those hub motors that we were using, the in-wheel motors, are great for efficiency. They're the bee's knees. Just about every car in the field, Challenge Class and Cruiser, was using the same motor, but they're very, very low torque. They can only sustain about 42 Newton meters per motor. I don't know if that means a lot to many people, but that's about 1/10 or less of what you'd probably use at cruising speed in a small 4-cylinder car on the road. So yeah, not very good. So yeah, these are the motors that we used. Yeah, as we said, no gear reduction in a hub motor because the motor is constructed in the wheel itself, and it's 1-to-1 gearing. adding more is not really appropriate because they're extremely expensive. They also weigh about 30 kilos plus each per assembly. And everybody else is using these guys down here, so that's a little boring, so we wanted to try something a bit different. So this is what we've got now. We did our research and came up with a company that a few of you may have heard of called YASA Technologies in the UK. YASA is actually an acronym for yokeless and segmented architecture. It's just a way that they've come up with of making their electric motors more compact. And we sent out for a differential off of a Toyota RAV4, which was not on a whim, but we did a fair bit of research and it had almost the exact gear ratio that we wanted. We're actually using it for the reduction because all differentials, of course, have their own final drive ratio. And that's enough for us with this motor that we don't need another gearbox. So this is 2.77 to 1. And we needed 2.211 or something, so it's very, very close. And it's very light as well. It actually only weighs about 10 kilos. So the idea here is diff in the rear of the car, axle going through, CV joints, where you see the blue rag. And we're going to make up a motor adapter plate which will mount our now pancake-shaped motor, which you might get a better shot in the next slide, directly to the diff. And that's going to be Kurt's job, or part of it, I guess, to design and build this very accurate bit of kit. So these are the basic specs. If you're interested on the motor, this is out of their advertising brochure. The peak power of these motors, these little pancake jobs, is up to 160 kilowatts, and this comes in a package that weighs only 27 kilos if you get the smallest version, which we have. So very, very high power density. And of course, they'll rev to 8,000 revs, so if you did want to direct drive them, you could go about 600 k's an hour if you had the aero for it, I suppose. So that's what we've got now. It's not what you would typically put in a solar car. It's only 96% efficient. Those hub motors are up to 99% efficient. And we're going to lose a bit with CV joints and gear reduction and things like that. So it's going to be interesting, but it's also going to be fun. So yeah, this is our motor on the test bench. Nice shiny looking thing. It's oil cooled, which is another thing that people would probably laugh at us for trying to put in a solar car. And it might all not work out, but it's going to be fun to try. That's our motor controller there. It's a 3-phase motor. That's our testing it on the workbench, and these guys have laser cut a prototype of the adapter plate that they're just test fitting. So yeah, then we had to get a bunch of stuff together in a hurry. So we had to build all new motor controllers, all new CAN bus controllers, fix all the problems that we had last year, and do most of that before we could get the motor up and running. So, and we also had a cooling circuit to put together. So yeah, we just started throwing things together. This is my very sophisticated home lab, which is definitely not a laundry. I'm just testing out the cooling setup here, pumping oil through our CAN-controlled oil pump, which we did a lot of research to find something that was compatible. So if anybody's heard of Arduino, those things are very, shall we say, not very professional, but they're lifesavers if you need to get things together in a hurry. So I've been able to write up code here to run this CAN bus pump, and here I'm just spinning it up, making sure that we've got command of the speed and the power. Then we just quickly prototyped up a instrument cluster effectively. It's going to be your old time sort of 7-segment display look, a bit from kit from Knight Rider kind of thing. This is our original prototype dash, which we used last year. It was adapted to a Tritium driver controls unit, which came with the hub motors. They're used fairly exclusively. That's an accelerator pedal out of a Toyota Prius, and that's part of our dashboard. So yeah, had to change all of that to work with the new motor controller. There's a better shot of it. Throwing things together, there it is, kind of working. And we had to make a vehicle control unit. This thing drives the, again, lots more Arduino stuff, 2 CAN bus controllers, an Arduino, and it talks to the motor controller itself. Lots of code, and this may or may not play, but this is a video of, no, that's all right, we're going to skip over it, but yeah, we eventually got it running like last week. It was just running on the test bench. So The video sort of shows us selecting gears, making sure we've got forward and reverse control of the motor, driving it with a Prius pedal. And just for a little bit of background, this is what we've already got built, so this will save us a little bit of time. This is a shot of the battery pack, or one of. We were going to use two of these guys. And this is the state that it was in the day before we left the competition. Over here is all our cell tap boards, which another student made sort of the week before. We're just starting this right together. I had to throw everything in a box like this, get up to Darwin, unpack it, get it back to this stage, and then start putting it all back together. And this is how that went down. This is some of the installation mess that we were working with in the pits, and this is what our pit lane looked like, whereas most other people's pit lanes just contained a car that actually ran. It's no fun, no.
I'm going to disagree with that. I saw a lot of work going on solar cars that week.
There was quite a bit, yeah. Like Adelaide Uni, I think, were next to us, and they were in a little bit of the same boat with their battery system, so everybody was blowing BMSs for some reason. And that's it, finished. They're just there for good measure. And yeah, so these are the specs that we've ended up with for this year's competition, which will be in October. Or what we're aiming for. We're aiming for about 35 kilowatts of peak power. The motor is capable of a lot more, somewhere around 160. That's to get us up the hills outside of Darwin, because our old car had about a 4 degrees of gradability, so it could climb an incline of, what's that, 10 or 11%, something like that. We need to get up about 20% incline for those hills out of Darwin, so we need a lot more torque. We're going to a little bit more than double the battery, so we're going to use our spares as well as the 2 packs worth, so we'll have 2,880 of those little 18650 cells like Tesla uses, and that'll be about 35 kilowatt hour battery pack. A little bit bigger solar array, that's actually going to be about 4 square meters. And yeah, shall I hand it over to Kurt to wrap up? Oh yeah, and the microphone. That's my phone.
All right, so looking forward, we, of course, a lot of the really good work we've had going on, particularly with meeting our budgets to actually get some of these things implemented, which has been a major struggle getting up to this year, has been with some of the involvement of some of the non-engineers, particularly some help from the business and funnily enough, the one that's been really driving the business and building and team outreach, social media stuff in our team has been an archaeologist. I'm not entirely sure how that happened, but she's a hell of a volunteer. But we are constantly looking for people who are willing to help us in these areas. And we have these events coming up if anyone's interested. We'll be at Science Alive, at least some of us will be. We're running an event coming up to get first year engineering students involved by giving the experiences of engineering students that have been getting toward the end of their academic careers. In uni, we've got our open workshops if anyone wants to come by and see what we're working on any Tuesday. All of you are welcome. That's down the pods at Tonsley. And we've got a quiz night and a games night for fundraisers coming up. So by all means, you would be welcome at any of these events, and you can find us on Facebook or email us at info@fastsolar.com.au. Thank you very much for your time, and does anyone have any questions? That was fast.
Put it on my lips. That motor. Let's talk dollars. Please.
What was the number on that one again?
So the UK price, I believe, is somewhere around £8,000 to £10,000 sterling. Obviously, freight is another significant component, and a motor controller is not cheap either. And it varies. It's a sort of custom design package for what you need. Yeah.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
What sort of battery management system have you got in your pack?
I'm just going to get you to stand in front of the microphone for a while.
That's all right. We're using Orion BMS. They're made by, testing my memory now, it's an American company anyway, Ua Energy Systems. Yeah, Orion BMSs. It's the 48 cell version.
So if you've got however many thousands of cells, and you've got
That's right, yeah, so the pack configuration...
you've got every cell monitored, every one of those 28,000 cells?
Yeah, so we group them in modules in parallel. So the pack configuration is 72P40S, so 40 series modules of effectively 72 in two groups of 36, all parallel together, so 72. And we'll monitor each of those with a temperature sensor and a cell tap to get the voltage of each cell. Yeah, of each parallel group, yeah. Sorry, I could probably show the slide. It's a ways back there, but...
I love
yeah,
clicking.
go
So
forward
you
too.
can,
Yeah, that one. So on the right-hand side, that black box with the fins on it, which has a light plug in it. If you want to point that, yeah. Sorry. This guy here is our BMS. It's hidden under there. This little unit here is purely there for temperature monitoring.
And so for charging, have you got a bypass circuit that bypasses a fully charged cell based on the voltage? How does it actually work?
That's right. So the BMS uses what's called dissipative balancing. So it just has a bunch of resistors, and it's got a cell tap, so it knows the voltage. It has a connection to every single group of cells, and it just shunts a resistor across that group if it's getting too high. It's a fairly typical way to balance cells, and it does all that for us, so we don't have to do all that. Because I'm told by people who know a lot more about these systems than me that don't design your own, buy them off the shelf if you can.
sorry for all the clicking. I thought I had another battery image in there. I think you up the back were first.
What oil are you using to cool them out?
I think it was a proprietary one supplied by the manufacturer.
Oh, right. Do you know what weight it is?
So we don't know weight. There is a public sort of brochure for, it's called Optical H. It's made by a company in the UK or America. I'm not.
It is
100% clear.
it is very low viscosity though.
Yeah, very low. It's sort of like water. I think the viscosity is somewhere around diesel. At 40 centistokes, something like that.
All right.
Do you make your controls, or would you just have to make the interface?
So this year we've just had to make the interface. So an interface to the driver to run the instrument vehicle and instrument cluster on the dash, and another interface to the motor controller itself, which talks CAN bus.
Sally?
Can I just ask about, you were saying that 80 kilometres an hour was your top speed, and that was a good speed for the class that you're entered in.
Mm-hmm.
That 1,200 kilometre run on one charge, that's an awfully long day at 80 kilometres an hour, isn't it?
Well, yes. When we were operating along the lines that we can pick our end and start points and work it out however we feel is sustainable, we had a slightly different attitude towards that.
Yeah. Yeah. So how do you think that will work? Like in terms of
Now?
maintaining a charge through such a long day, you might run out of solar input at some point, or almost.
Well,
Might decrease.
the rule from last competition was that you could bring a generator, and then it's just how much energy you had to put down. You'll get marked down and lose your points.
Yeah.
That's no longer an option. So if we can't collect the solar and we can't make it to our allowed plug-in,
Yeah.
then we're going to have to go slow and wait for more solar, which is one of the reasons why we've really tried to aim for better efficiency, larger solar array, and more energy storage. And definitely a higher top speed. So, yes?
I noticed you got big windows and a lot of panels. Can't you replace those panels and the windows with extra solar panels?
The windows, there is a cost benefit along the sides of the car that it's the moment you start getting your shading a lot earlier, and I think we had limited in TPPs, but where the windows are along the side, we weren't really thinking of useful space. I personally would much have preferred if those were clear spaces instead of yeah, I can't. Opaque is the word I was trying to think of. I'm not good with English, it's my first language. We did have reverse cameras and internal monitors that, which was basically an aerodynamics decision, but again, we were definitely not going to be putting solar panels there. I think they really should have been clear.
considered retractable bearings to add more panels?
No.
Good idea.
We're actually within 1 square metre of the maximum allowable cell area anyway, so we're getting pretty close, yeah.
I was more considering the nature of that question from the weights and mechanical complexities, the connections that would be flexing and likely to fail, and aerodynamics problems. I can see a lot more loss than gain in such a scheme.
Had been considered though, hadn't it? At one point.
Do you have to have glass in the windows, or are you allowed to have some sort of plastic?
That is plastic. It doesn't have to be glass.
What, the front windscreen?
Oh, our front windscreen is glass. We got that one from a BMW originally. Well, we picked a BMW design, and then we had Gorilla Corning donated it. The only reason we don't have plastic on the front is that plastic doesn't make good windshields. It is easily scratched, which particularly out in the outback is a problem. And
I guess the register, you have to have glass or anything?
it has to meet standards or be an approved thing. So I'll go a little further. We had to work to Australian design rules, which are for individually constructed vehicles, which is slightly different to the rules for every other vehicle on there. So there's a lot of leeway for not having, say, crash tested a car and so on that every other car on the road has to do. But then a lot of the rules are restrictive and only allow certain pre-approved parts. For example, for a long time we didn't think we were going to be... We have to have lights, of course, but they also had to be incandescent lights. And it took us a long while to be able to negotiate past that and be able to have LED lights, which were way too powerful, that we harvested from a pre-existing car that the parts have been approved for. So there's a lot of challenges like that. Yeah,
A couple of words that might help you with your last 0.5 of a square metre. Andrew spec, funny car, spoiler.
Yeah, aerodynamics is an issue as well, yeah.
No, it's a drag reducer.
Yeah, drag reducer, and it will give you a little bit more surface area.
What was it called?
I'll talk to you about it after.
Well, I think actually the point we were raising there was that we were getting close to the upper limit of the what we were allowed to put in the comp, so hence we're less concerned about trying to get more.
The limit should be the goal. So.
This is true.
The limit, not under it, the limit.
And a spoiler is cool.
Any more questions at all? No? Well, I would like you to join me in thanking these guys to come along. Most of all, particularly to come and tell us what didn't work last year and why, because that's always the really interesting story with something like that. And there's a number of people in the room who have converted their own electric cars that have had similar challenges. And in terms of last minute construction, we've got a couple in the room that towed the first ever lightweight caravan from here to Tasmania about 18 months ago and left with the electric car converted and updated and the caravan under construction en route. So you're not alone in those challenges by any means, and we're really appreciative that you've come along and said all of that to us. So
I would also just like to say that when our mate was saying all these things that we feel went wrong and that held us back, I'm taking responsibility of those things. I'm not, like, we do have our battles with the university, but we're not trying to blame them. We're just owning what happened.
Yeah. It's always difficult with funding and space and everything else, and in fact the people here that would like to convert cars have the same issues with all of that. So it's just to let you know there's some similarities in experience within this room, well and truly.
All the way up to Darwin, I kept saying to people in sentences, I don't like that word should. Please don't use it in a sentence.
Okay. Well, again, thank you for coming, and we hope that you can stay. We've got a couple of little more segments to get through, but then when we have a cup of tea, we'd be glad if people probably want to, especially down in Mike there, might want to catch up with you a bit further.
Absolutely.
So thank you very much.